There were 300 children on the ship at the time. 300 boys and girls with smiles on their faces and a great ache deep down in their hearts. You see, all of them had just said goodbye to fathers and mothers, perhaps not to see them again until after the war was over. Of course, they would be brave. That's why they were smiling. But they couldn't help thinking of the dear ones that they had left behind. Maybe of their baby sisters and brothers and their pet dogs and cats and all the things that make home so dear. You see, these children were having to leave England to go to another country because of the bombing. And now they were leaving the land they knew and loved so well and setting sail for a foreign country, knowing only that there would be kind friends there and a warm welcome. That is, if they got through all right. There was another worry: would they get through? Another big ship crowded with children had just sunk, and some had been drowned despite all the gallant sailors could do to help them. Perhaps there would be another submarine about this time, or a dive bomber, maybe. But they had promised to be brave, and they would be brave come what might. The first day, all the passengers on the ship, from the youngest to the oldest, were lined up on the deck and told what to do if any emergency should arise. In the front row, there were 300 children. Behind them, the women passengers, and behind them again the men. When they were all assembled, one of the chief officers began to explain about the lifeboats and who was to go in each of them if they should be attacked. Then he told about the rafts and how to hold on to them. After that, he took a life-saving jacket and he showed them how that they should put it on, pointing out how important it was that it should be tied on just the right way. Then he took a life belt and let everyone see exactly how one should put it over his head, that he might be supported while swimming about in the sea. Among the hundreds of people on the deck at that time was little Tommy. He was only 6 years old, hardly old enough indeed to know what it was all about. Among all these children and grown-ups, he didn't know a single soul, and he felt very, very lonely. If only he could see his mother again, just for 1 minute. Tommy kept his eyes glued on the man with the stripes on his arms and the gold buttons on his coat. What was he saying? Now, if we should be torpedoed, which we hope won't happen, then all you children over here, make at once for the lifeboat. It seemed to Tommy as though the man with the golden buttons was pointing right at him. So he looked up at the lifeboat and wondered why he should have to get in that little tiny boat. It didn't look safe. It was just too small beside the big steamer. And if there isn't time to get into the lifeboat, went on the big man with the bright golden buttons, then grab a life belt if you can and jump into the sea. Jump into the sea, thought Tommy. How dreadful. Just then the ship rolled, and Tommy could see the great expanse of ocean so cold and gray and unfriendly that it made his poor little heart sadder than ever and frightened too. Does he mean that I have to jump over into the sea? He asked himself. And he didn't like to answer it. And of course he couldn't ask anyone else because they might think that he was afraid, and he had promised his mom that he would be brave. Soon the officer said, "That's all for now. And don't forget to keep your life jackets on till we have passed the danger zone." And with that, they were all dismissed like a class at school. Some went back to their cabins and some to the dining room, and soon Tommy found that he was all by himself. Making sure that nobody was looking, he picked up a life belt and carried it downstairs. Not knowing what else to do, he sat down on the bottom stair and he waited all alone, his arm through the life belt. How long he sat there, I do not know, but by and by, a man came along and spoke to him. Tommy recognized him as one of the teachers who had come on the boat to care for the children. "Hello, Tommy," he cried. "What are you doing here all by yourself?" Tommy looked up with a strange sadness in his little face. "Please, sir," he asked, "how do I put it on?" "Well, I'll show you," said the teacher kindly. "First you do this, then that. See, it's quite very easy." "Yes," said Tommy. "Thank you, I see, but please, sir, I don't want to jump into the sea." Tears came into the teacher's eyes, but he didn't dare let Tommy know how he was feeling, for he had to be brave too. "Oh," he said cheerfully, "you won't have to jump into the sea, of course not. Everything is going to be all right, you'll see." "But I couldn't jump into the sea," said Tommy. "Really, I couldn't." "Well, of course, Tommy," said the teacher, "nobody wants to jump into the sea, but if you have to, Tommy, I know you'll be a brave boy, won't you?" Tommy was silent for a moment as he thought it over in his little head. Then very solemnly he said, "Well, I promise not to mind if you'll promise to hold my hand." The teacher promised, and bidding Tommy good day, went his way. Well, I'm glad to tell you that he didn't have to jump into the sea. Tommy, all 300 children, landed safely in the New World. But the memory of Tommy's courage and faith live on to bless us. For if that dear little boy of 6 was willing to jump into the cold, cruel sea if the teacher would hold his hand, then cannot we be brave when things go wrong with us? When something that we have to do looks cold and dark and dangerous, shall we not look up to the great teacher above and say to him, "I'll promise not to mind if you'll promise to hold my hand"? You see, each one of us is facing a terrible experience far beyond our imagination. In the closing moments of this earth's history, we're going to enter what the Bible calls a time of trouble like has not been since there was a nation on the earth. And we cannot imagine how horrifying it's going to be. Every one of us needs somebody to lean on. And in this last great challenge, we're going to be all alone, friends, except for Jesus. He's the only one we have. And we have a little bit of time to accept him and to put our hands in his. And he'll bring us through this thing. He's the only one that can. He's promised to do that. We read in Psalms 91, it says that he that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, he is my refuge and my fortress, my God, in him will I trust. Surely he shall deliver thee from the snare of the fowler and from the noisome pestilence. He shall cover thee with his feathers, and under his wings shalt thou trust. His truth shall be thy shield and buckler. Thou shalt not be afraid for the terror by night, nor for the arrow that flieth by noonday, nor for the pestilence that walketh in darkness, nor for the destruction that wasteth at noonday. 1,000 shall fall at thy side, and 10,000 at thy right hand, but it shall not come nigh thee. Only with thine eyes shalt thou behold and see the reward of the wicked, because thou hast made the Lord, which is my refuge, even the Most High, thy habitation. There shall no evil befall thee, neither shall any plague come nigh thy dwelling. For he shall give his angels charge over thee, to keep thee in all thy ways. They shall bear thee up in their hands, lest thou dash thy foot against a stone. Thou shalt tread upon the lion, the adder, the young lion, and the dragon shalt thou trample under thy feet. Because he hath set his love upon me, therefore will I deliver him. I will set him on high, because he hath known my name. He shall call upon me, and I will answer him. I will be with him in trouble. I will deliver him and honor him. With long life will I satisfy him. That promise is given to those who go through this last great crisis that we're going to study here tonight. Warning after warning has come from Scripture, but in spite of it, people don't want to believe the warnings. They want to believe that everything is going to go on as usual, and that nothing is going to interrupt their plans, either for marriage or children or the homes or the jobs or the future. And yet I'm here to tell you that everything is going to dramatically change very soon and never be the same again. Warnings came to the little town of Pili. There was a volcano on that island, and there were earthquakes, there were bursts of flames coming from the mountain. The radio warned daily for the people to leave their town. Every day, people in the newspaper told of the dangers that affected that town, and the people could not believe it was going to happen to them. And then one day there was a terrible rumbling sound. One of the shopkeepers dove for the floor in his shop, and in a moment he was writhing in agony as superheated steam passed over his body. And this is what the town looked like a few moments later. He stumbled out of his establishment with his back wholly burnt, and everything was dead quiet. There was not one living soul in a town of 30,000. The warnings came over and over again, just as it came to Europe about Adolf Hitler. And people ignore them. How could anything that dangerous exist? And the result was one of the worst slaughters that history has ever seen. Listen, history is replete with the fact that human beings psychologically cannot accept warnings. And yet the Bible is telling us that Jesus is coming. And before he comes, this world will be destroyed. And every sign is pointing to that event taking place today. I believe that we're almost at 0 hour for the greatest cataclysm this world's ever seen, and the most wonderful moment for those who are ready and waiting for Christ. There's an allegorical story in Ezekiel. And in that story, it tells that God directs a man that has an inkhorn by his side. And the Lord said unto him, go through the midst of the city, through the midst of Jerusalem. Now, Jerusalem is a symbol of God's church on earth. I want you to go through Jerusalem, go through the church, and I want you to put a mark on the foreheads of the men that sigh and cry for all of the abominations that are done in the midst thereof. This is symbolism representing how apprehensible sin is to those hearts that are filled with the Spirit of God. They're praying for people, they're praying for the church, they're looking at the world, and they recoil from the sin there, and it's represented as sighing and crying for the abominations that are done. God is watching these people that are uniting their life with His, and His mind is becoming their mind, His heart is becoming their heart, and He puts a seal on those people. And then to these others that followed, He says, slay utterly old, young, both maids, little children, and women, but come not near any man upon whom is the mark, and begin at my sanctuary. Then they began at the ancient men which were before the house. This would be that church in this world that has the most light, the most knowledge, that has a responsibility of warning the others. And he says, defile the house, and fill the courts with the slain, go ye forth. And they went forth and slew in the city. And it came to pass, while they were slaying them, and I was left, that I fell upon my face, and I cried. Ezekiel cries out before God, oh, Lord God, will you destroy all the residue of Israel, your church, in thy pouring out of thy fury upon Jerusalem? This did not happen. This is a prophecy of the day and age when you and I live. When we go to the book of Revelation, we find there the description of a people that are sealed by the seal of the living God just before the terrible plagues destroy the church and the world. And that's what this is depicting. Going to Revelation chapter 14, John saw in vision a very special group of people at the end of time that were sealed by the Spirit of God. And it describes them as being on Mount Zion with the Lamb. The Lamb is a symbol of Jesus as the priest in the heavenly sanctuary. Mount Zion is a symbol of heaven. And it describes this special group of people having the Father's name written in their foreheads. The word name is a symbol of His authority, His character, and His title. God places His own character. And we know from the Old Testament that the character of God is His law. The new covenant is described in Ezekiel, Jeremiah, and in Hebrew as God writing His laws upon our hearts. And the heart is a symbol of the mind. God will place His law in the minds of His people right at the end of time, and that will separate them from all other Christians, all other people in the whole world. This group that keep all of God's laws. And I heard a voice from heaven as a voice of many waters. That's the voice of Jesus, Revelation 1. And the voice of a great thunder, symbol in judgment. And I heard the voice of harpers harping with their harps. They sung, as it were, a new song before the throne and before the four beasts and the elders. And no man could learn that song but the 144,000 who were redeemed from the earth. What does a song mean in symbolism? The whole chapter is symbolic here. A song represents the experience that they're having in their lives. They have an experience that no other man on earth is having. They alone are filled with the law of God and His Spirit. And no one else is having that experience on the earth at that time. It goes on to say that these are they which were not defiled by women. As we've studied in the book of Revelation, women represent churches. And in the Bible it talks about Babylon, the mother of harlots. Harlots representing false churches. These are not defiled by women. They are not defiled by false churches and false beliefs. They believe in the Bible and the Bible only. For they are virgins, they are pure. These are they which follow the Lamb, Jesus, wherever he goes. By faith they're following their heavenly high priest in the heavenly sanctuary. These were redeemed from among men, being the first fruits of God, and to the Lamb. They represent the perfect character that man has always been able to have through faith in Jesus Christ alone. And in their mouth was found no guile, for they are without fault before the throne of God. It makes it very clear that during the time of trouble, these people are sealed, and the powers at that time cannot affect them, cannot hurt them. They're the only ones that go through that time of trouble without hurt, without being affected by those plagues, and live to see the coming of Christ. Now you think about this for a minute. God is giving us a moment now of peace. Just a moment. Just enough time to take hold of the Word of God and so fill your mind and heart with it that God's laws are written there. And to live a life through the power of Christ that will be flawless. And God can put His seal upon you and protect you through the hours that are about to come upon us. What will these people be like? What will the world think of them? Well, number one, because they live by the Bible, which is considered to be archaic in this modern generation, they'll be considered odd. Because they live by a code of moral principles that is laid out in the Bible through faith in Christ, they will be considered singular, odd, straight-laced, nonconformists, fanatics. And friends, if you want to accept Jesus, just remember, He said, the servant is no better than the master. If they persecuted Him and they spoke evilly against Him, they're going to do the same to you, because the same Spirit that was in Jesus will be in you. The message that brings about this people is given again in Revelation 14, beginning in verse 6. And there it talks about this last message to go forth to the world, and it says, I saw another angel. An angel means message or messenger. Flying in the midst of heavens, that means for everyone to see, having the everlasting gospel to preach to them that dwell on the earth, to every nation, kindred, tongue, and people. But you say, the world has already received a lot of the gospel because the church has been out there doing missionary work. No, they have never heard this message clearly presented before. This is the everlasting gospel, that very gospel that was believed by the apostles that went out in power under the Holy Spirit. That message that teaches that a man, through faith in Jesus, may live a life perfect, a life that wholly conforms to the law of God. That's a message you don't hear from the churches today. They say, just going to take your guilt away, that's all, but He can't keep you from sinning. But Jude says that God can keep you from falling and present you faultless before the throne of God. That's the Word of God. Jesus came that the dominion of sin would be taken away from our lives. He said, sin shall no longer have dominion over you. I'll give you a new mind and a new heart. And that's the gospel that's to go to the world. Saying with a loud voice, fear God, give glory to Him, for the hour of His judgment is come. In this message of the everlasting gospel of power through Jesus Christ is also a message that we have entered into the period of the last judgment. That we're in that now, that there's a court convening in heaven over you and I today. In that period of time of ancient Israel, symbolically, the end of the ceremonial year, the people fasted. They prayed. They took off all their jewelry. No earrings, no rings, nothing. Everything came off. And they went before God, before the sanctuary, and there they pled with Him to keep their hearts and their mind pure during that last day of the ceremonial year. That's the type of what we're to be doing right now, friends. We are to come before God. We are about to meet our Maker. And we have to have purity of heart and mind. And it means a complete submission of the life. That's what this is saying. And it says you're going to do this through a worship of the one who made the heavens and the earth, the fountains of the waters. And there followed another angel, saying, Babylon is fallen. Now what's Babylon? To return to a worship of the Creator means that you and I have to shift our focus back in time, back all the way back to the second chapter of Genesis, after our God, through His Word, created everything. In 6 days, He stopped His work. He came together with our first parents, and He said, this day that you and I are meeting together on is a sacred day. I'm going to sanctify it. Every hour in it is holy. It's being set aside for a sacred purpose, and that's a sign between you and I forever. And as you study the word sign in the Bible, you'll find that the sign between God and His people as a perpetual covenant was the same day of the week, the Sabbath, that was established anciently. As God places His seal in His people, that fourth commandment is going to be part of that seal and will be something that will be very obvious to the world. It'll make everyone stand apart from the Christian churches that take the whole law of God and keep all of His commandments. There followed another angel saying, Babylon is fallen. Remember, as we studied Babylon, Revelation 17, Babylon is the church, the Christian church, fallen because of her sins and her rejections of the warning of God and her desire to unite with the political powers of this world. Jesus says that they are fallen. They're fallen from His grace. That great city is because she made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. Somehow this apostate Christian system has influenced the nations to has deceived them to a false form of Christianity. And God says to come out, separate from it. Verse 9, the third angel followed, saying with a loud voice, if any man worship the beast in his image, and receive his mark in his forehead or in his hand, the same shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God. If you're going to take part in this apostate system of Christianity, it will sound good. It will sound right. But God says you're to live by every word that proceeded out of the mouth of God, not out of the mouth of man. Jesus instituted no priesthood when He left this world. He says there's one mediator between God and man, and that's Jesus Christ, our Lord, our high priest. He said, call no man Father, call no man Rabbi, for there's one that teaches you, and that's the Spirit. God calls each one of us to come boldly to the throne of grace with our Bible in our hand as individuals and study with the Spirit to guide us and prepare us for that day. And the third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, if any man worship the beast in his image and receive his mark in his forehead or in his hand, the same shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out without mixture into the cup of His indignation. And he shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. And we've studied the mark of the beast. The Roman church, that power that took over the seat of Rome, fulfills every single one of the 20 prophecies mentioned concerning it. There is no other power that could be that power. And has claimed since the Council of Trent that Sunday is the sign or the mark of its ecclesiastical authority, the transfer from Saturday to Sunday. If we partake of that counterfeit, when at the end of time God tests every man's heart, then He's going to have to let us go. And He's given us a desperate warning, the most important warning in the Bible against that form of worship. Now look at verse 12. At the time that this world is embroiled in a religious liberty crisis over this Sunday issue, as we've studied. Some of you are here for the first time. We've been studying, this is our 14th night. At the time that this crisis, this conscience crisis comes, God's people will come to the forefront out of all religious denominations. They'll come forward. They'll gird themselves for battle. They'll put on the whole armor of God, and they'll fight for the cause of truth, for which once the primitive Christian church fought and shed its blood for so many centuries. We're going to see it all happen again in a very rapid movement at the end of time. And we've studied out that primitive Christian church, Sabbath-keeping church throughout the ages. Then verse 14, I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and upon the cloud one sat like unto the Son of Man, having on his head a golden crown, and in his hand a sharp sickle. When God's people come to view in the religious crisis that's just upon us, then very shortly, after that moment in time, Jesus is going to come to this earth. And when He comes, symbolically, John in vision saw Him with a great sickle in his hand. That sickle represents the great final harvest, the resurrection of the dead, and the ascending to heaven of the righteous living and those who are righteous dead. A great resurrection morning, a great reunion. In Revelation chapter 15, John sees 7 angels come out of God's temple having 7 plagues, clothed in pure and white linen and having their breasts girded with a golden girdle. And it says that one of the 4 beasts gave unto the 7 angels 7 golden vials. At this moment that Christ stands up in the heavenly sanctuary now to prepare to come to earth, to save those who have made a covenant with him by sacrifice, to obey his word, come what may, honor, reproach, joy, or sorrow. No matter what it takes, at that moment in time, terrible plagues will be poured out on this earth. And these have been prophesied all the way through the Bible, the great day of the Lord, the day of judgment. And here we are, with every prophecy reaching its final fulfillment. And that day is right upon us, friends. God's people are arising. There are thousands of voices giving the same message I'm giving all over the world. And God's calling you to give this message, to join this movement, to proclaim the coming of the Lord. It says in verse 8 that the temple was filled with smoke from the glory of God and from his power, and no man was able to enter into the temple until these plagues were fulfilled. That temple, as we studied, when we studied the sanctuary symbolism, the smoke in that temple represents the last mediatory work of our Savior before he leaves heaven. Now in chapter 16 of the book of Revelation, John in vision actually sees the plagues that are to be poured out on our earth. I heard a great voice from heaven, a voice out of the temple saying to the 7 angels, "Go your way and pour out the vials of wrath of God upon the earth." And the first went and poured out his vial upon the earth, and there fell a noisome and a terrible, terrible sore upon men. The second, he says, poured out his vial. That vial was poured out upon the sea, and it became like the blood of a dead man. What must it be like? What will take place at the time? I don't know. I can't answer it. But I know if you look back to the plagues that fell upon Egypt, they were supernatural judgments of God. The waters actually did change and actually did turn to blood at that time. What's going to take place when that happens again? It says in verse 4, "And the 3rd angel poured out his vials upon the rivers of the water." That's the fresh waters, the drinking water. "And I heard an angel of the waters say, Thou art righteous, O Lord, which art and was, and shall be, because thou hast judged thus. For they have shed the blood of saints and prophets, and thou hast given them blood to drink, for they are worthy." What will it be like when there's no fresh water to drink? Sure, you can survive drinking blood. And many of these plagues are not universal, or there would be no one alive on the surface of the planet. But they are judgments of God, bringing men to account for what they've done. No more fresh water in areas. Thousands of people will die. Then it says in verse 8, "The 4th angel poured out his vial upon the sun, and it scorched men with fire, and there was a great heat." Some areas of this world are going to become so hot, no rain, animals, people are going to die, and there'll be terrible, terrible famines. And the famines that we're having today are only a shadow of what is about to hit this world in the judgment. The 5th angel poured out his vial on the seat of the beast. Now you remember from Revelation 13 how it says the dragon, the Roman kingdom, gave the beast his power, his seat, and great authority. That seat is in Rome. That's the very seat of the Caesars, and it was taken over by the church. Somehow in that part of the world, a terrible event is going to take place. A terrifying destruction. I don't know what's going to happen. Darkness. It says they gnawed their tongues for pain. People will die by the thousands and thousands, probably the millions. And the 6th angel poured out his vial upon the great river Euphrates, and water thereof was dried up, that the way of the kings of the east might be prepared. As we studied at the end of time, there are rulers in this world, an occult movement that will bind the world together. What will prepare for this great movement uniting the world together? If you go back to ancient Babylon, you'll find that the river Euphrates actually flowed into that city and was the lifeblood of its commerce, supplied it with its food, its drinking water, everything. It took care of that city. If that river dried up, Babylon would cease to exist as a city. In the Bible, in Revelation chapter 17, the apostate Christian church, the church who has rejected the Bible and turned to traditions and theologies that are based upon ancient traditions rather than the Bible only. Somehow people are going to lose their confidence in that. The belief of people in that system is going to dry up, and that kingdom, that Babylonian religion of the false churches, is going to come to an end. And you watch, as people become more enlightened in history, they realize that some of these doctrines that were formed in the Dark Ages to control human minds, to bring in superstition, that have kept people chained to a system that has rejected the Bible and the Bible only, people are going to throw it out. They're going to give it up, just as they did in the French Revolution. When they began to worship the God of reason, almost the first thing they did was take the priests out and slaughtered them on the streets. We're going to see a terrible event like the French Revolution take place to destroy Christianity. What kind of motivation would it take to make people so repulsive of a system that they would want to destroy it like that? Well, I'll tell you something. There are many things about the Roman papacy that we yet do not understand. But we get glimpses even today of what's taken place. This is from the book Gurri's Doctrine of the Jesuits. It tells about a gruesome sight in a Roman Catholic university in Mexico. They searched the university building and the Church of Bethlehem, which is connected with them, and underneath the church is a hidden cellar. They found a gruesome situation with an officer as guide. I went down by a trapdoor and concealed stairway to a subterranean vault, where by the light of a candle he showed me hundreds of skulls of men, women, and children, bones of all kinds, portions of human remains with flesh and hair still clinging to them, bodies which had been cut up, packed in small boxes, covered with quicklime and concealed in the wall, buried in the floor, great piles of dirt and bones which had been dug up in one part and piled in another to make way for new interments. It was horrible. It was awful. But up above the beautiful decorated Catholic church, one of these days the convents are going to be open. One of these days the churches are going to be open, many of these in lands that have never known the light of the Western world. And it's going to be discovered that the church has continued her horrible work of torture and death and murder in the basement of those churches. And friends, it's going to come to a terrible end because of that. I believe that. And the next plague was seen by John. He says, I saw 3 unclean spirits like frogs come out of the mouth of the dragon, beast, and false prophet. 3 great powers to this world. He saw spirits moving. He says, they are the spirits of devils, working miracles, which go forth to the kings of the earth, and the whole world to gather them to battle against the day of God Almighty. And we studied at the climax of this great movement of binding the world together, through the movement of spirits of devils, it says that Jesus comes as a thief. If you don't recognize this movement, there's no hope for you. Do you understand that? This movement that's binding the world together is working through you too. It depends. I don't know what part of it you're a part in. But as this movement that John saw was a movement of spirits, we find that demons are working through every avenue they can. There's a revival of witchcraft today under the title of psychology and psychic powers. It's the old witchcraft that's bound men's minds and souls to the devil. And it's happening in every kind of situation, from businessmen taking positive thinking seminars, to kids in school developing their ESP in class. It's happening, you hear it on the radio, television. You're not safe for a moment unless you keep this Bible constantly in view. The rise of Satanism. Much of what's taking place in the charismatic churches and Pentecostal churches today is paralleled to things that are taking place in the occult. 1,000 years before Christianity, men were speaking in tongues and prophesying in exactly the same way. I believe that spiritualism is moving through the ranks of the Christian church today, as well as the rise of spiritualism moving through the ranks of science. Demons are working through all the powers of the earth. Another thing moving through courts is this uniting of church and states, this bonding together that's taking place. A great world movement, uniting, preparing for a great repulsion of the truths of Jesus Christ. Friends, do you think for a moment that you'd believe something if it was hideous and ugly and was obviously evil? No. Satan comes in these last generations as an angel of light. He will appear to be a miracle worker, appear to be a movement that helps people. And in it all, he'll be binding people's souls. There's a movement underfoot, too, the great flying saucer movement. We talked about that has got thousands in this world believing that somehow the saucers are going to come, that Christ will come in a flying saucer. All these movements are working together and follow the same type of sciences. They're the sciences of the ancient, occult, esoteric, secret societies. And the world is being bound together. And the strongest force in this movement, we talked about it, we've studied it together, is music. Rock and roll music. Many of the different forms of music today are binding your mind hypnotically to spirit forces that you will find almost impossible to shake free from. Many young people have already gone too far, and demons are actively involved in their lives, and they don't even know it. And if you talk to them about giving up the music, they'll laugh at you. They can't give it up. It controls their lives. And I don't care whether it's a secular rock music, satanic rock music, or Christian rock music, whether it's Striper or Petra or any other group. That music is psychologically separating you it's separating your ability, the higher powers of your mind, to control the lower powers. It's destroying your moral fibers. And let it go. Grab your Bible and cling to it like you never have before. This movement is going to result in a separation of the world and those who have faithfully followed Jesus, followed that still small voice through His Word. They'll become the objects of universal hatred. Are you ready for that? Are you ready for everyone to hate you? Are you ready to lose all your friends for Christ's sake? We talked about counting the cost of what it means to give your life to Christ. There will be a great gathering. Verse 16, it says ultimately this movement, when Jesus comes, the world will be ready to repulse Him. It says a gathering together in a place called in the Hebrew tongue, Armageddon. It means a gathering together in the high places. These movements are universal. There'll be a gathering together all over the world to destroy God's people and to repel His coming. The next thing that's described in verse 17, the seventh angel poured out his vial into the air, and there came a great voice out of the temple of heaven from the throne saying, "It is done." When that voice of Jesus comes rolling through this earth saying, "It is done," the wicked drop their armaments and tremble as the sight of Christ's coming comes into view. It goes on, and there were voices, thunderings, and lightnings, and there was a great earthquake, such as was not since men were upon the earth, so mighty and so great. And the great city was divided in three parts. It fell. It says in verse 20, every island fled away. The mountains were not found. This earthquake is going to move the crust of the earth just like the waves of the sea. The mountains are going to disappear, and the islands are going to disappear. There will be no life left after the coming of Christ on this planet, except those who have been raised up with Him. It describes a great hail falling out of heaven, and it says that these things will weigh about 60 pounds each. This world will be wholly wrecked, wholly destroyed at the coming of Christ. There will be nothing left on this planet, no livable place, no roads that can be driven in, and the cities will be flattened by the powerful hail, 60 pounds apiece, these chunks of hail, nothing left. Why do you think God wants us to know these things? Because He loves us. He's desperate for us to accept Him before it's too late. Jesus at some time has to end this horrible drama on this earth of so much suffering. But when He withdraws His Spirit from the earth and allows the end to come, the destruction will be so horrible. Many of you people don't realize that the reason things go on the way they do today is only because God's protection is here. But God has promised a new heaven and new earth, and He wants to bring that into existence. Another place, Revelation chapter 19, describes the coming of Jesus again in different type of symbolism. This time it describes the coming of the angels in Christ on great white horses. It says, out of His mouth comes a sharp sword that represents His word, and He's coming to destroy or to smite the nations. In verse 16, it says that He has on His vesture and on His thigh the name King of Kings and Lord of Lords. People have denied Him in this world, but He is the King of Kings, the only one. And I saw an angel standing in the sun, and he cried with a loud voice, and he invited the fowls of the air to come and to eat the flesh of those that die on the surface of this planet. And it's going to be a terrible, terrible thing. Finally, it says in verse 20, the beast, representing the Roman apostate Christianity, was taken, and with him the false prophet, the false Protestant Christianity. These two were taken, these powers that worked miracles that deceived people. They were taken together, and these two were cast alive into a lake of fire, burning with brimstone, the coming of Jesus. And the remnant were slain by the sword of them that sat upon the horse which sword proceeded out of his mouth. And the fowls were filled with their flesh. Christ all the way through the gospel spake the people to watch and be ready. Because he says, when I come, it'll be like a thief. You won't know unless you're watching. Another vision John had, which was the farthest reaching concerning the plagues, telling us exactly the issues that will be climaxing during the time of the plagues, those things that will be causing wars and devastation. Those issues were released historically into this world. And so it describes these things in symbolism. It says another angel came and stood at the altar, having a golden censer. And of course we know from the symbolism of the sanctuary that this represents the priest in heaven performing his last mediatorial work. And there was given unto him much incense, represents this last mediation for mankind, to offer with the prayers of the saints. And it says in verse 4, the smoke of the incense which came up with the prayers of the saints ascended before God out of his hand. Jesus making his last effort of pleading for mankind. And then it says the angel took the censer, filled it with a fire, and cast it into the earth. And remember the study of the sanctuary we did? At the end of the Day of Atonement, at the end of the ceremonial year, the high priest took the censer, brought it out of the sanctuary into the court, and that was it. There was no more mediation for sin. Those that did not take part in that sacred service were lost. They were cut off from Israel. And God used that as a symbol to show us that you and I have the time today to come into Christ while Jesus is still mediating our prayers in the heavenly sanctuary. Now the first angel sounds in these plagues, called the trumpets, and he saw hail, and he saw fire mingled with blood cast on the earth, and he saw the trees being burnt up. And when the second one sounded, he saw something that looked like a tremendous mountain of fire falling into the sea, and it appeared to him that the sea became blood. And he saw the creatures dying in the sea and ships destroyed. And then the next part of this great thing, it says the third angel sounded, and he saw something that looked like a star falling like a lamp from heaven, like a meteor falling to the earth, and it hit the fresh waters. And he says that those waters became bitter, and men died from those waters, the fresh waters. Verse 12 says, and the next one, the fourth angel sounded, and he noticed in the vision that the sun became dark, and the moon became darker. The stars could hardly be seen. And then he beheld, after that, flying through the midst of heavens, an angel saying, woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth for the next plagues, the woes they call them, the next plagues that are about to fall. They're far even worse than the first ones. John saw these visions. I don't believe he understood what they meant. I believe that he wrote down faithfully everything he saw, because these visions are for you and I today of what is about to happen to us. What did it mean, fire and hail mixed together and the trees being burnt up? If we go back in history, we find a time when the Roman Empire rejected the seventh-day Sabbath-keeping Christian world. The entire world kept the Sabbath, but Rome, Italy, and Alexandria, Egypt. We proved that by scores of documents one night. They rejected it, and they accepted the imperial Christianity of the Caesars, the sun-worshipping Christianity, with the result that God withdrew his protection and allowed a probation to close for the Roman Empire. What happened was that the northern European barbarians moved into their places. One horde after another destroyed Rome, and groups even came in far from the Orient, from Asia, the Mongol invaders. Rome fought desperately, but her power kept shrinking until she only had a small portion of Europe. The inroads of these many invaders resulted in Europe being broken up into the countries of Europe today. Over 20 countries are involved now in an area that was managed largely by the Roman Empire. But those areas of the world are seething with anger, animosity towards one another. We've seen terrible wars result because of the continual racial and theological and ideological strife going on in that part of the world. And the angels of God are just holding these things back while God is making his last appeal for people's souls. We find today that the world is on the verge of a terrible war, and that Europe is largely at the center of what's about to happen. That war will result. It focuses on the ideologies of Europe, East and West, but that war is going to affect the whole world at the end of time. When the movement takes place, believe me, there are countries all over this world that are aligned on one side or other, and there's going to be a terrible, terrible warfare. Men, women, and children all fighting and dying together. Now let's go into the last three woes that the angel said are far worse than the first ones. It says, "And the fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven to the earth, and lo, he was given the key of the bottomless pit." Bottomless pit is a symbol of emptiness. Some great star, symbol of angel, or a star, great messenger, appears to come from heaven, and he has the power of opening an empty world, an empty waste place. It sounds kind of confusing, doesn't it? It says he opened this bottomless pit, and out of this pit there came a smoke, looked like a furnace, and there came out of this smoke something that looked like locusts upon the earth. But these locusts had power like scorpions have power on the earth. They had power to kill. What does a scorpion represent? If you go to the Mideast today, the scorpions are called the teeth of the wind. And when they come like a great cloud, like a smoke. And when they settle, they eat absolutely everything, every leafy thing in its way. It's just totally destroyed in their wake. But these locusts have the power of scorpions. They destroy men. A scorpion is a symbol of suffering and a symbol of death. And I do not know fully what this represents. But I know that historically there was a tremendous movement in the Middle East. The sword and the sermon. 13 centuries ago, Arab warriors forged an empire greater than Rome's. We read that in 565 Justinian died, the master of great empire, but 5 years later Muhammad was born into a poor family in a country 3/4 desert, sparsely populated. You see, there's an empty land, by nomad tribes whose total wealth could hardly have furnished the sanctuary of Saint Sophia. No one in those years would have dreamt that within a century these nomads would conquer half of the Byzantine Asia, all Persia and Egypt, most of North Africa, and be on their way to Spain. The explosion of the Arab Peninsula into the conquest and conversion of half the Mediterranean world is the most extraordinary phenomenon in the medieval history. What happened? The rise of Muhammad. These people believed he was a prophet, and following his guidance, these nomads were forged into one of the greatest armies that history has ever seen. And as they burst against the walls of Europe, there was almost no power that could stop them. And then it describes something very interesting in the prophecy. It says that these were commanded they shouldn't hurt the grass of the earth, any green thing, neither any tree, but only those men that have not the seal of God in their foreheads. Evidently, God even then would protect his people that kept the Sabbath. And in those days shall men seek death and shall not find it, and shall desire to die. Now look at this. Somehow they're not going to hurt the grass of the trees, it says, and not those that are sealed, that have the seal of God. Now what does that mean? Let's go back to the great Muslim invasion of that part of the world. It says when the Arabian tribes gathered for the conquest of Syria in 632, Muhammad's uncle, Abu Bakr, who succeeded the prophet after his death, gave this following order, which fits the Bible prophecy exactly. And this is what he says: when you fight the battles of the Lord, referring to Allah, he says, acquit yourselves like men without turning your backs. But let not your victory be stained with the blood of women or children. Destroy no palm trees, nor burn any fields of corn. Cut down no fruit trees, nor do any mischief to cattle, only such as you kill to eat. Revelation 9:4. When you make any covenant or article, stand to it and be as good as your word. As you go on, you will find some religious persons who live retired in monasteries and propose themselves to serve God that way. Let them alone, and neither kill them nor destroy them. The reason for this, and you remember from our study on the Sabbath situation, that the Sabbath-keeping church of the East were the educators of the Saracens, the leaders of the Mohammedan world. And they had high respect for what they're calling monasteries here were in fact schools of education of the Sabbath-keeping Christians. And those people were to be protected by the Muslim. The seal of God, his law in their hearts, protected them. But it says you will find another sort of people that belong to the synagogue of Satan who have shaven crowns. These would be the monks of the Roman Church. Be sure you cleave their skulls and give them no quarter till they either turn Mohammedan or pay tribute. Now it says that this power would continue for 5 months. I want you to notice about the middle of this page, it says the 5 months is an important prophetic period which establishes prophetic chronology in a marvelous way. Recognizing the well-proved principle in prophecy chronology that a day represents a year, we have the following 5 months of 30 days each, which means 5 times 30 or 150 days. By reckoning a day for a year, we've got 150 years in this prophecy of the Ottoman Empire, allowing it to destroy men. Now it says, the historian E. Gibbon says, it was on the 27th of July in the year 1299 of the Christian era that Othman first invaded the territory of Nicomedia. And the singular accuracy of the date seemed to disclose some foresight of the rapid and destructive growth of the monster. Starting from this date, we count 150 years, and this brings us to AD 1449. During these 150 years, the Ottoman Empire engaged in almost continual warfare against the Greek Empire. They did not conquer it until 1449, when the last Greek emperor, Constantine, took the throne, but only after seeking permission of the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. An exact fulfillment of the prophecy. 5 months equals 150 years in prophecy, and perfectly fulfilled with the rise and the establishment of the Ottoman Empire. The term scorpion in prophecy symbolizes suffering and death, the power to kill. And it describes these things. They looked in shape like scorpions, but they were like horses prepared for battle. They rode on horses. They were horses. And their heads were, as it were, crowns, and on their heads it looked like they had crowns of gold. Their faces were the faces of men, but they had hair, long hair, or something streaming out behind them, like women, and they had teeth like the teeth of lions. It says they had breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wings sounded like chariots or horses' running to battle. They had tails like unto scorpions, and in their tails there were stings, and their power was to hurt men for 5 months. Prophecy fulfilled. They had a king over them, which is the angel of bottomless pit, and that king's name was Abaddon and Apollyon. We look at the symbolism. Some people just look at it and say, I can't comprehend what that means. But John was seeing something, and he was trying desperately to explain to us this terrible destructive force that came upon the Roman world. It says that the king over it is Apollyon and Abaddon. Those are 2 worlds that mean the destroyer and the exterminator. It says the 6th angel sounded. This is the next plague. And I heard a voice from the 4 horns of the golden altar saying to the 6th angel, which had the trumpet, loose the 4 angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates. And the 4 angels were loosed, which were prepared for an hour. Now listen again to this prophecy carefully. An hour, a day, a month, and a year, for to slay a third part of men. It describes the horses. It describes the whole thing. It describes so many things. And then it goes on and says that there were that had fire proceeding out of their mouth before them and behind them. It was the new soldiers of the Ottoman Empire, the Arabs that used the rifle for the first time. These men were absolute accurate at using the rifle, shooting behind them or in front of them. It had never been seen before. And they came out of the emptiness of the desert in such mass numbers with the clouds of dust rising behind them. Very few armies could stand against this great movement, and the Ottoman Empire was established. Their leaders ruled in a period of comparative peace, but the prophecy said that it would be 1 hour, 1 day, 1 month, and a year. Now, if we were to transfer that into a day for a year, this is what we'd have. A day, a month, and a year. This was the period given to this power. We have already noticed that 5-month period associated with the previous trumpet commenced in the year 1299 and ended in 1449. Still calculating a day for a year and recognizing that a prophetic month is 30 days, let us make this further calculation. A day equals a year, a month equals 30 years, 1 year is 360 years. This totals to 391 years. Reckoning from the summer of 1449, the 391 years will bring us to the summer of 1840. And as already mentioned, it was on July 27, 1299, that Othman invaded Nicomedia. This began the previous measurement of 150 years. Now let us add the last fraction of the measurement, the 1 hour, and that would be 1/24th part of a day. This fractional part of the year would therefore be 15 days. Adding 15 days to July 27 brings us to August 11, 1840. And do you know what happened on that day? You see, this prophecy was published in the newspapers of the Western world, telling the people that something was going to happen in the Ottoman Empire August 11, 1840, if the interpretations were correct. And on August 11, 1840, the Ottoman Empire submitted to the powers of Europe and lost its political sovereignty in that part of the world. It ruled for exactly that period of time, a day, a month, and a year, perfectly again fulfilling these time prophecies. The Muslim invasions of the old Roman Empire fulfill the prophecies of Revelation chapter 9, but it led into motion one of the most dangerous movements that have taken place on our planet. This trumpet is still available to cause destruction and death, and it is only because God is holding this thing back. In the States, it's a very dangerous thing. In Europe, it's a very dangerous thing. We know that terrorism revolves largely around this segment of the world's religious beliefs. These people have been brutalized. Many of them have deep ingrained hatred that goes back to the war with Israel. And it's just like a powder keg over there. Children are being prepared for war. Many of them have already had to go out and fight in the battles. And how is the U.S. helping in it all? They're building up the Arabian world militarily. And at the same time, Israel. They're building up Israel militarily as well. And friends, it doesn't take too much to spark a war over there. But Israel, this is Masada. Remember anciently at Masada, the Israelites, rather than give in to the Romans who were attacking them, committed suicide. Hundreds of them committed suicide. Well, they no longer have the Masada complex. The last answer to that question, do you folks still have the Masada complex? One of their leading generals said no. Today we have the Samson complex. Remember Samson? When he died, he took all of his enemies with him. These people have the atomic bomb. And believe me, if they think they're going to go, they're going to use that bomb on their enemies. What will happen in a nuclear war is very important to us. All of these things that could cause war all around us are just being held check by a loving God. This clock stopped at 8:15, August 1945, in the morning, when this bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. At that time, 100,000 people died. And within a few days later, after the bomb was dropped on Nagasaki, 200,000 people were dead a few weeks later. It was the greatest devastation that man had ever seen up to that time. The people, something happened out of a completely silent sky. The Japanese call it the place of suffering. They claim that this page describes the power of the explosion at different places away from the place where it was blown up. And it talks about the movement of solid rock, the melting of different things that just melt at high temperatures. They assume that the temperature at ground level below that blast was 6,000 degrees centigrade. And even rock, stone, people, everything just vaporized in a moment. But those who had received the radiation afterwards got this disease. Hemorrhaging broke out in the skin. The tissues were breaking down, and vomiting, and eventually a terrible death. It says the rays simply destroyed the body cells, caused their nucleus to degenerate, and broke their walls. Many people who did not die right away came down with nausea, headache, and diarrhea, and it describes these symptoms leading to the death of thousands of these poor people. The Bible talks about the day of judgment. It describes the things that are going to happen on that day. It says, "This shall be the plague wherewith the Lord will smite all the people that have fought against Jerusalem. Their flesh shall consume away while they stand upon their feet, and their eyes shall consume away in their holes, and their tongues shall consume away in their mouth." When we look what happened to the people, we realize their bodies did consume away while they were standing right on their feet. And those that were further away, their flesh was actually cooked in those moments of heat. One fellow talks about here, went out in a boat to try to help these people. He said they did not move, and he realized that they were too weak to lift themselves. He reached down and took hold of a woman by his hands, but her skin slid off in huge glove-like pieces. He was so sickened he had to sit down. Then he continued to try. Their skin was cooked, and they were still alive. Still alive. This was a priest who was trying to make his way through the rubble and the park to bring water to some people. And then it says, on his way back with the water, he got lost on a detour around a fallen tree. And as he looked for his way through the woods, he heard a voice ask from the underbrush, "Have you any water?" He saw a uniform, thinking there was just one soldier. He approached with the water. When he penetrated the bushes, he saw about 20 men. They were all in exactly the same nightmarish state. Their faces were wholly burned. Their eye sockets were hollow. The fluid from their melted eyes had run down their cheeks. You see, this atomic warfare fulfills many of the descriptions that are given about the day of judgment. And the songs of the temple shall be howlings in that day, saith the Lord. There shall be many dead bodies in every place. They shall cast them forth in silence. And this is a description of what took place after the bomb went off. There were dead bodies everywhere. There was practically no room for me to put my feet on the floor. It goes on to say that after a while they became just like objects or goods that we handled in a very businesslike way. Is an old woman lay near me with an expression of suffering on her face, but she made no sound. Indeed, one thing was common to everyone I saw: complete silence. Complete silence. Dead bodies everywhere, casting them forth in silence. Everything I saw made a deep impression on me. A park nearby covered with dead bodies waiting to be cremated, very badly injured people evacuated in my direction. The most impressive thing I saw was some girls, very young girls, not only with their clothes torn off, with their skin peeled off. My immediate thought was that this was the hell that I had always read about. Another thing it describes is a darkening of the heavens as clumps of smoke and ash began to go heavenward because of the flames. And then it talks in this page about drops of water coming down out of the sky that were just filled with radioactivity. And anyone that got that water on them developed severe burns and died. He noticed that the sky was growing darker and darker. The day was growing darker. It says the day of the Lord is a day of darkness. He mentions here that at Nagasaki, it says at 2 minutes after 11 o'clock on the morning of August the 9th, the second atomic bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. What took place? The people in Hiroshima had no idea, because there was no communication. There was no way for them to know what was going on in the world out there. What had happened to them was the end of the world. And as these plagues at the end of time hit various areas of the world, that's it. People have no place to go. No roads, nothing, no communication. They'll wander just like they did at Hiroshima, just aimlessly, not knowing where to go, where to find food, nothing. It comes to an end. This is the bomb that was dropped on Nagasaki. What happens when these bombs go off? There's a tremendous blast of light. If you're near that and you look up at that, it'll blow your eye sockets out. If you're further away, it'll burn the retinas permanently. If your mouth is open while you're looking up at it, your tongue will just shrivel up in your mouth, and your skin will be wholly burnt. But what happens is there's a tremendous shock wave that goes out. Just before that shock wave, there's a blast of photons. These photons, this electromagnetic pulse, actually take all the electricity out of everything, just burst it into the air. And all your radios stop, and your cars stop because the batteries won't work, and the generators that run the electricity for the cities stop working. There's no electricity after this blast, no communication or anything. Nothing can move because of it. The tremendous shock wave goes out, just a tremendous blast of power going in all directions, bringing super heat with it. And then it burns up the oxygen, and there's a tremendous implosion. That heat ignites everything when the air comes back in. And as a result, it goes up in smoke. The ash goes up into the atmosphere. The ash is charged with radioactivity, and then it falls back to earth, kind of like a snow. And if you get any of that on you, you'll die. It's a very, very horrifying thing. But the bomb that dropped on Hiroshima was a teeny little bomb. The bombs that they have today are 70 to 150 times the power, and there's approximately 3 bombs for every major city aimed at it. It can be shot from submarines. It can be shot from halfway around the world and hit its target within 100 feet. But what also is known is that these bombs always cause a major earthquake. When God releases his hand of protection, when his people are sealed, and he's placed them in a protective place, and men are left to themselves and their selfishness, and the wars break out across this world, there's going to be terrifying earthquakes. Now, developed within the last 2 decades was a bomb called the neutron bomb, which would not destroy structure. It wouldn't destroy grass or trees, but it would just kill people. But this bomb, believing that it would be a real aid to stop tanks from coming over the border into Western Europe, the Europeans don't want it. The Americans don't know how to deploy it. And if they ever try, there'll be an immediate atomic war, as the Russians could not take the chance on that deployment of that type of weapon on their border. Weather weapons have been used that charge in the high atmosphere with electricity, which affects the super stream of air up above. And this is altered because of this. Tesla discovered this many years ago, genius Tesla, in the area of electromagnetic energies. And this has been used to alter weather. It's taking place even today. Beam weapons. Russia is 15 years ahead of the United States in beam weapon technology. All these things are just a few of the things that are available. I'm going to read this page to you. Nuclear weapons are only part of man's mass annihilation arsenal. Nerve gas, while not as ostentatious, noisy, or spectacular as the H-bomb, can be just as lethal. A minuscule 10 milligrams of nerve agent sarin, if sprayed over a 10 cubic meter area, will dispatch a man within 10 minutes. Even more potent is the agent known as VX. One small drop on the skin quickly turns a person into a quivering, uncontrollable, nauseated spastic. Death comes within minutes unless immediately treated. All it would take would be one airplane, the right wind condition, a heavy populated metropolitan area, and millions of people would gasp their last wondering what hit them. They don't need to even drop a bomb, friends. Even more effective are the biological agents. Botulinus toxin is one of the more potent examples. A microscopic dose either inhaled or ingested brings on excruciating death within 6 hours. A few pounds would be more than enough to dispatch the entire world's population if uniformly dispersed. Botulism is only one of the many diseases that can be spawned by germ warfare. Others include anthrax, brucellosis, tularemia, and Q fever, even rare and exotic maladies such as glanders and so on. Friends, some cities like L.A., which has over 15 million people in it, has only one water source to it. And I believe when warfare breaks out and God withdraws his spirit from the hearts of men, very cruel things are going to take place and millions upon millions will die. Today the world trembles under this concept that there's a danger of an all-out nuclear war. But these people are politicians. They don't believe that they'll use those nuclear weapons. They're playing this thing just like a big chessboard. They believe that they're manipulating people's feelings, and what they want is a one world government, and by keeping everyone terrorized or in fear, they believe that they'll get that because nations will gladly say, listen, rather than blowing it up, we will gladly give our sovereignty to a one world system. The United States is spending 10 times as much money to arm other countries than it is itself. And the world is becoming a theater for a slow-moving but active Third World War. There are over 40 hot wars going on right now in this world, and thousands of people are dying. We are in the midst of war. The United States has the largest peacetime budget for military machinery in its history. The world is arming. Everywhere you go, you'll find that the armies are bristling, and they're well-equipped, and they're ready on a moment's notice. But I was shocked when I read this book, The Arms Bazaar, because it pointed out an interesting history of armaments. It pointed out that when the Gatling gun was first designed, they believed that that would end all wars. That they believed the British would use that and fight their enemies and there would be no more resistance. But they came out with a better Gatling gun. And then they came out with bombs. And one thing after another has come along, and every time a new design or a new technology comes along, everybody has to have it. And you know what it's done? It's made the armament industry the largest financial industry in the world. It has its own intelligence agency, its own propaganda agencies. It's got to have hot wars in order to try out its products. It advertises in magazines to governments all over the world. One item can cost many millions of dollars. I was intrigued in going through some of these magazines and looking at some of the things that are advertised just like you would advertise a car on a car lot, telling about its killing capacity and the amount of destruction that it's done through different wars, especially the wars in Southeast Asia where these things have been tried out. It seems like every aspect of technology for war has been developed. But you know what they do? Just like the car companies do. I mean, this is a big business. They have quite a number of technologies developed and designed, but they don't put them out on the market except one at a time. Then when everybody gets the new item, then they come out with the next one. And they have these things just lined up, and billions upon billions of dollars are involved in this thing. The next battle that's going to be fought is going to be far different than the battles that are fought today. Helicopters will control the battlefields. They'll be directed and monitored by high-flying planes and jets. Whether it be submarines or whatever, they can be in communication with special communication centers in out-of-the-way places in this world. People can be totally devastated on the land. Civilization can be almost destroyed, and yet these people will continue to fight for the pieces of real estate that's left. The technology is far beyond our ability to even grasp. Take, for instance, the stealth bomber, which can escape radar detection. It's made of a plastic that's coated with a certain type of metal that both absorb radar. Also, it's made very thin, so the radar would seem to pass over it. It cools the heat that's coming out of its engine so it can't be picked up on heat detectors. And it flies so quietly that it can't be picked up by sound detection as well. It's an amazing apparatus, but there's technologies in that now for war that go far beyond our wildest dreams. We know that the military is using chips that are 250 times the capacity of the little chips that you're using in your computers today. We have no idea what's going on, but this next war is going to be fought on the land, on the sea, in the air, and in outer space, and nothing will not be affected by it. These little countries pumping out their hardware, all trying to get the revenue that comes from being a good source of armaments, are all contributing to a great general destruction that I believe is coming. And how does the USSR, the United States, feels like that what they're doing is a deterrent, but the USSR is the only country which has studied fighting and winning a nuclear war. The Russians see nuclear war not as unthinkable, not as the end of human existence, but as presenting opportunities, if necessary, to force the capitulation of the United States and its allies, the occupation of their territories and their absorption into a new Russian empire. In a planned series of meetings, discussions, and publications from 1956 until approximately 1962, the Soviet Union did a total ground-up reevaluation of military doctrine, strategy, and military art for the coming Third World War with the United States and its allies, in which it was thought that nuclear weapons, especially nuclear-tipped rockets of all sorts, would be the main means of destruction of the enemy. Now, what is their philosophy? Will they use these bombs last? Well, it says the U.S. doctrine of escalation places nuclear strike as the last fateful act of a nuclear war. The Soviets, on the contrary, make massive nuclear strike the very first act of a World War III. As Nikita Khrushchev said in 1916, war will begin not as it did in the past by invasion of frontiers, but by rocket strikes deep into the interior. Not a single capital, no large industrial or administrative center, and no strategic area will remain unattacked in the very first minutes, let alone days, of the war. Okay, what's the schedule for the war, the Third World War that Russia is planning? In remarks delivered during the first week of June, Folha de Sao Paulo, Brazil, June 2, Cuba Fidel Castro announced 1988 doomsday for the United States. Those who attempt to ignore Castro's statements as just more communist propaganda are very foolish people. In the second paragraph, it is no longer a secret that Moscow is now engaged in a crash program preparations to launch total thermonuclear war as a surprise attack on the United States by no later than 1988. I first discovered this fact during May 1983 and reported my now massively corroborated findings and forecasts to appropriate officials, the highest levels of NATO intelligence, community in Europe, agree, as many leading members of the USA intelligence community also agree privately, the facts are so overwhelming that any government official but a State Department or liberal Republican or Democrat would be totally convinced. Something is about to happen in a few years. I don't know how much time we have, but I know that God has been holding the winds of strife back in His love, waiting for people to accept Him. The Bible says that He's not willing that any man should perish, but all should come to a knowledge of the truth. The Lord does not want any man to die. He says, why? Why will you die? Because people just don't want to believe that it could be so bad. They want to accept the warnings, and history is replete with warnings. These things happen. They're going to happen. It describes a third of the trees being burned up. And no matter what people try to do, they're not going to be able to stop the destruction of our forests and the beautiful lands as the superheat from this destruction takes place. You know, people now are worried about a few acres of trees, and the people are out there chaining themselves to trees or laying in the way of trucks so they won't damage a few species. But friends, I'd worry about my soul right now, because everything's about to be destroyed. There will be no species preserved for later generations if the biblical prophecies are true, and they've been true all the way down to today. It talks about some great burning mountain hitting the sea becoming like the blood of a dead man, the creatures in the sea dying and the ships going down. I don't know what that is, but it could very well be a result of man's annihilating abilities at the end of time. What happens all over the world as the clouds of dust go into the sky and fill the heavens up? The temperature begins to fall. There's freezing taking place all across what used to be warm continents. Eventually, that freezing will take place even in the tropical zones. And many people in the southern hemisphere feel a bit safe from nuclear war. But the facts are, in time, the higher air streams will bring this covering down, even down here over Australia and New Zealand, and you'll have an ice age down here. There's some tremendous information now out available by scientists to show what is going to happen at the end of this Earth's history. When it's over with, there will be no possibility of life on this planet. There will be no hope. When we look at the concept of locusts or teeth of the wind, and realize that even during a nuclear exchange, there'll be an effort on the part of all kinds of ground fighting to destroy that group of people that they feel is responsible for all of the suffering, all of the plagues, and all of the death taking place in the world. The reason why God's people will become the objects of universal hatred, friends, is because they'll be blamed for all the things that are happening, even though it was their effort to warn people about what was about to happen as a wrath of God. And with the modern technology, I promise you there will be no place on this earth where you could possibly hide. There's no place you could go to escape. Why, they, with their satellites, they can take a picture of a golf ball. They can take a picture of a license plate from a satellite and read it today. They can take infrared photography from space and know where you are. There is no way. They have night vision for their guns and for their soldiers, and each little group that is hiding away in the mountains, there pleading with God for deliverance, will be surrounded. There may be a gun leveled on each one of them, waiting just for the order to come down, because an order will come down to destroy every single last one of those who accepted Christ and Christ only as a personal Savior. And what will they do in those awful moments of anxiety? They'll drop to their knees before the God and plead for His deliverance. The Bible talks about a terrible time called the time of Jacob's trouble, as these people are weeping and they're pleading for God. Given the spirit of supplication, they pour their hearts out to Him to save them. They have waited for Him. They've given their lives to Him. They gave the warning that the world needed. And because of that, they've become the object of hatred of the world. And now as they're about to be destroyed, they look upward, and as the army is about to crush out their life. And the Bible tells us that the heavens will open like a scroll. And there'll be seen in the heavens a dark cloud about the size of a man's hand at first in the distance. And then, somewhere in that cloud, the glory of Christ and His angels begins to burst forth. Literally thousands of angels. It said Jesus says in Matthew 24, it'll be like the lightning. It'll go from one horizon to the other, from the east to the west. The entire sky is going to be filled with the beings of majesty that have waited so long to come to earth. and take man back home with them. But what will the wicked do at that time? How will they feel? Some will cry out, they were the ones that could greet each other with a kiss and wash each other's feet, the ones that loved each other so much, the ones that were trying to destroy are the very ones that God is coming for. It says, enter into the rock and hide thee in the dust. For the fear of the Lord and for the glory of his majesty, the lofty looks of man shall be humbled, and the haughtiness of men shall be bowed down, and the Lord alone shall be exalted in that day. As those magnificent dark clouds that Psalms chapter 18 tells us about, that God surrounded himself with dark waters of the sky. As the clouds open up, there's going to be a terrible, terrible storm. These people are going to be fleeing into the rocks, to the caves of the mountains for protection. And they shall go into the holes of the rocks and into the caves of the earth, for fear of the Lord and for the glory of his majesty when he arises to shake terribly the earth. In that day a man shall cast his idols of silver and his idols of gold, which they made, each one for himself to worship, to the moles and to the bats, to go into the clefts of the rocks and to the tops of the ragged rocks, for fear of the Lord and for the glory of his majesty when he arises to shake terribly the earth. The description is, when that terrible storm takes place, as the glory of God bursts forth, that the commotion in the heavens will result in hailstones that weigh 60 pounds apiece, and the destruction will be absolutely immense. And in the wake of that, a great sheet of flame will surround this entire earth. The Apostle Peter says that the heavens and the earth will melt with a fervent heat. And that is talking about the coming of the Lord, the soon coming of the Lord. Everything will be surrounded by heat, by fire. Nothing will be able to survive in it except God's people. It says the sinners in Zion are afraid. Fearfulness has surprised the hypocrites. Who among us shall dwell with the devouring fire? Who among us shall dwell with everlasting burnings? And then God describes the ones who will. He that walketh righteously and speaketh uprightly, he that despiseth the gain of oppression and shaketh his hands from the holding of bribes, that stoppeth his ears from hearing of blood and shutteth his eyes from seeing evil. I'll tell you something right at this point. If you watch television and you watch movies and you listen to the radio, you cannot be in that group, because you're constantly seeing and hearing evil. You have to make a covenant with your eyes and a covenant with your ears to behold only those things that are good and righteous and loving and great in the time that you spend with God. You've got to turn your attention away from the things of this world to be among that group that will stand in that fire, as the ancient Hebrews did. What will be left of the surface of this earth, friends? Nothing. Its charred remains will be left behind as God's people ascend away from it into the heavens. A broken, charred planet from one end of the earth to the other. The cities will be broken down. There'll be no grass, no trees. What about God's people during those last moments, those intense moments while they're praying? And Jesus is coming. They look up and they know he's coming in the clouds of heaven. What happens to them when the fires surround them? It says, he shall dwell on high. His place of defense shall be the munitions of the rocks. His bread shall be given him. His waters shall be sure. Thine eyes shall see the King in his beauty, and they shall behold the land that is very far off. They're on their way to heaven. While others have died all around them, 10,000 at thy right hand, 1,000 at thy right hand, and 10,000 at thy left hand, these folks are going to be redeemed from the earth. And Jesus is going to come. The angels will come to them. The angels, the resurrection will take in place as Jesus comes, and loved ones will be placed back in the arms of those who have left them and departed, never to be separated again. Children put back in the arms of their mother. The hope that a Christian has in remaining with Jesus Christ. This is the greatest hope. And now's the time for it, friends. There's no way that even adults with the serious experiences they've had in life could ever grasp the seriousness of the time that you and I live in right now, in these last few moments. I know some people say, well, look, every path leads to God. Well, I'll tell you something. If that's true, then I'm safe anyway, aren't I? But if I'm right, then you're not safe. And I'm going to stay on the safe side because I'm going to be there in that kingdom, and I'm going to bring my family with me. And I'd love to see everyone in this room there. All we have to do is look upon Jesus. The Bible says that if with open face, that means looking right at him, we behold as in a glass or a mirror the glory of the Lord, we will be changed or transformed into the same image from glory to glory. Jesus doesn't ask so much. He just asks for your full attention, for you to turn from the things of this earth and just look straight at him. Put your affections on heavenly things now, folks. I beg you, while there's still time left. You can turn around and walk out of here and forget this thing. And then when these things happen, you're going to cry out in agony. I was warned. I knew it, and I rejected it. Or I just didn't take the time to study the Bible and to get ready for what's going to happen. Don't take that chance. You know, even though it's a late hour, look at while Jesus was in agony and dying on the cross, a man who had been wicked all of his life, in the last moments there before his death, he saw Jesus dying next to him, and he turned and he said, "Remember me when you enter into your kingdom." And Jesus turned right back at him. He saw the man's heart was sincere. The man wanted to give his life to Christ. And Jesus said to him, "I promise you this day, you will be with me in paradise." Christ is just wanting to do that with you right now. He's knocking on the door of each man's heart. And he's pleading with you to make that step, to give your life to him before it's forever too late. I'll just tell you a little story briefly as we close. Lindberghs became extremely famous after he flew over the Atlantic Ocean. They had a little child, and when it was about 2 years old or so, the little toddler was kidnapped. He was marked for kidnapping simply because his dad was so famous, and his dad could come up with a ransom. The kidnappers finally sent a note to these parents who had to wait weeks before a note came. And they were praying. And they just longed to see their little boy again. They loved that little boy. That's all they wanted, to get their boy back. And so when they got that note that said, "Listen, if you send so much money, we'll send you a note of how to find your little boy." So they got the money together. There was no problem. Gladly, they had given everything, given up their plane, given up all of their all of the popularity that they had gained, just to get their baby back. And so they gave the man the ransom, or they sent the ransom. Then they got a note back that told them where to go to find the baby. And they followed that note carefully, but at the end of it, there was no baby. Then a few weeks later, they got another note. And in that note, it gave other directions of how to find the baby. And they followed that note, trying to find the baby. They had paid the ransom. All they wanted was their baby back. And then finally, months later, someone found a shallow grave, and the little boy was dead. They had killed that child and never intended to give him back to these parents. Those parents suffered sorrow at the loss of that child. But I want you to stop for a minute, and I want you to think about a loving God. We were kidnapped by Satan, Lucifer. We were bound by him, and we had been Christ. He created us, and he loved us. When Satan came and took us, Jesus knew what the ransom was. He knew what would have to be paid. He knew he would have to take our sins upon himself and become our substitute. When he left heaven, he knew the bloody path of sorrow and suffering he would have to pass over for you to bring you back to heaven. He knew it all. And yet he left heaven, knowing it all, knowing what he'd suffer, just to give you a chance to have eternal life. I'll tell you, we can't even understand a love like that. There's just no way. Christ today is saying to you, "Listen, loved one, I've paid the ransom, and I want you back." And I don't see how any of us could be so cruel to God after he's done so much to go ahead and reject him and die. Because God never forgets. He says, "I am persuaded that neither life nor death," let me read it right from the Bible. This is the Apostle Paul that's describing the tenacity of the love of God for mankind. He says, I am persuaded that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor powers, nor things present, nor things to come, neither height, nor depth, nor any other creature shall be able to separate us from the love of God, which is in Jesus Christ our Lord. You might perish, but He'll love you forever. And He'll bear the scars of the battle He went through for you throughout the years of eternity. Oh, I beg you for your sake, I beg you for Christ's sake, not to go out of this room tonight until you've made that decision to give your life to Christ and to make sure that you're going to follow a course that'll bring you into the kingdom of heaven. Make this Bible an important part of your life. I invite the folks to sing now. Jesus wants you. In times, when I think about some of the folks that we've gone to love here, and I've been praying for them, and I find myself on my knees pleading with God on their behalf, and the feeling just comes through me sometime, Lord, I couldn't stand it if they were lost. I just couldn't stand it if they were to perish, if they were to lose eternity. And here I'm just praying for one person, and I find tears coming to my eyes as I plead for their souls before God that they'll make that eternal decision. And what about God, who loves everyone, who looks into their heart and loves them more than anyone could possibly love them? I think it's just giving us a little sense of how much God loves each one of us. There's going to be folks up here available to pray with anyone that wants to give their hearts to Jesus tonight. And I just encourage you to make that stand if God moves upon your heart to do that. And let's just kneel together. Dear Father in heaven, ruler of the universe, give us a view of your love. Make Jesus so real that all the things of this earth will just fade away from our view. Dear Lord, now in these closing moments of time, plead with Thee to move upon the hearts of the people to make a decision for eternity. I ask that each one in this room will be moved upon by Thy Spirit. Guide them, dear Lord. May not one of them be lost, I pray. These things I pray in Jesus' name, amen. Now, the last night is not going to be a night with bombs and rock and roll singers and all that kind of stuff we've studied about. We're going to talk about what the Bible teaches that heaven is going to be like, and what we're going to be like, and what we're going to do there. It'll be a night to just lift our eyes heavenward together and look into something that very few people really understand: what happens after this. And I'd just like to encourage you to be here to share that time with us.